Second part of the Ingenious Hidalgo. Don Quixote of La Mancha, 1615. By Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, author of its first part. Dedication to the Count of Lemos. Foreword to the reader. The poor can have honor, but not the vicious; poverty can cloud the nobility, but not entirely darken it; but, as virtue sheds some light on itself, even due to the inconveniences and loopholes of narrowness, it comes to be esteemed by the high and noble spirits, and, consequently, favored. First chapter. Of what the priest and the barber went through with Don Quixote near his illness. Cide Hamet Benengeli recounts, in the second part of this story and Don Quixote's third outing, that the priest and the barber spent almost a month without seeing him, for not renewing him and bringing past things to his memory, but this did not stop them from visiting his niece and his mistress. They noticed that his mistress at times was showing signs of being in her right mind. Finally they visited him, and found him sitting up in bed. They were very well received by him. They asked him about her health, and he gave an account of himself and her with great judgment and with very elegant words. And Don Quixote spoke so discreetly on all the matters that were touched on, that the two examiners unquestionably believed that he was entirely good and in his entire judgment. But the priest, changing his first purpose, which was not to touch him in chivalric things, wanted to make an all-out experiment as to whether Don Quixote's healing was true or false, and so he said that it was certain that the Turk was coming down with a powerful navy, and that its design was not known, nor where it would unload such a great cloud. And his majesty had supplied the coasts of Naples and Sicily and the island of Malta. Don Quixote responded to this: his majesty of him has acted as a most prudent warrior in providing his conditions with time, so that the enemy does not find him unnoticed. But if he took my advice, I would advise him to use a precaution, of which his majesty must now be very far from thinking about it. Hardly had the priest heard this when he said to himself, "May God keep you in his hand, poor Don Quixote, it seems to me that you are falling from the high peak of your madness to the deep abyss of your simplicity." But the barber, who had already had the same thought as the priest, asked Don Quixote what was the warning of prevention, which he said was well done. Perhaps it could be such, that it would be placed on the list of the many impertinent warnings that are usually given to princes. Said Don Quixote at this moment: "Is there more, if not to send his majesty by public proclamation that all the knights errant who wander through Spain gather at court for an appointed day, that, even if only half a dozen came, such could come among them, that alone would suffice to destroy all the power of the Turk? Keep an eye on me, your graces, and go with me. Is it a new thing, by chance, to undo a single knight-errant an army of 200,000 men, as if all together they had a single throat, or were made of alfanique?" "Oh," said the niece at this point, "may they kill me if my lord does not want to be a knight-errant again. Errant knight, I must die, and let the Turk go up or down when he pleases and as powerfully as he can." In the house of the insane in Seville there was a man whom his relatives had put there for lack of judgment. This graduate, after a few years of recollection, made it clear that he was sane and in his right mind, and with this imagination he wrote to the archbishop, imploring him earnestly and with very concerted reasons to send him out of that misery in which he lived, for by the mercy of God he had already collected the lost judgment, but that his relatives, to enjoy part of his estate, had him there, and, despite the truth, they wanted him to be mad until death. The archbishop ordered one of his chaplains to find out from the rector of the house if what that lawyer was writing to him was true, and that he likewise speak to the madman, and if he thought he had sense, he should get him out and set him free. The chaplain did so, and the rector told him that the man was still going crazy, that, since he spoke many times as a person of great understanding, after all he shot with so many foolish things. The chaplain wanted to do it, and, putting him with the madman, he spoke with him for an hour and more, and in all that time the madman never said crooked or absurd reason. Before, he spoke so attentively, that the chaplain was forced to believe that the madman was sane. And among other things that the madman told him was that the rector had a grudge against him, for not losing the gifts that his relatives gave him because he said that he was still mad, and with lucid intervals. The chaplain determined to take him with him so that the archbishop could see him and touch the truth of that business with his hand. With this good faith, the good chaplain asked the rector to order the clothes in which the licentiate had entered there. They put the licentiate in his clothes, which were new and decent, and, as he saw himself dressed as a sane man and naked as a madman, he begged the chaplain to give him permission out of charity to go and say goodbye to his crazy companions. And, when the lawyer arrived at a cage where a furious madman was, although then calm and quiet, he said, "My brother, see if he sends me something, I'm going home, that all our madness comes from having empty stomachs and brains full of air. Make an effort, that the decline in misfortunes weakens the health and brings death." All these reasons of the lawyer heard another madman who was in another cage, asked loudly who was the one who was leaving healthy and sane. The lawyer replied, "I am, brother." "Look what you say, attorney, don't let the devil deceive you," replied the madman, "calm your foot, and stay in your house, and you will save the return trip. I know I'm fine, replied the lawyer, and there won't be any reason to go back to the stations. Are you good? Said the madman. Now well, it will say, walk with God, but I vote for Jupiter, whose majesty I represent on earth, that just for the sin that Seville commits today, in getting you out of this house and in keeping you sane, I have to make such a punishment in it, that it remains memory of him forever and ever, amen. Don't you know, little graduate, that I will be able to do it, because, as I say, I am Jupiter thundering, that I have in my hands the scorching rays with which I can and usually threaten and destroy the world? But with only one thing I want to punish this ignorant town, and that is by not reigning in it or in all its district and surroundings for 3 whole years, which must be counted from the day and point in which this threat was made onwards. You free, you healthy, you sane, and I crazy, and I sick, and I tied up. That's how I think about reigning, like I'm thinking about hanging myself. But our licentiate, turning to our chaplain and taking him by the hands, said to him, don't be sorry, my lord, and don't pay attention to what this madman has said, that if he is Jupiter and it doesn't want to rain, that I am Neptune, the father and the god of the waters, I will rain as many times as I feel like it and it is necessary. To which the chaplain replied, with all that, Mr. Neptune, it will not be good to anger Mr. Jupiter, your grace stay at home, that another day, when there is more comfort and more space, we will return for your grace. The rector and those present laughed, at whose laughter the chaplain half ran, they undressed the lawyer, he stayed at home and the story was over. Well, is this the story, Mr. Barber, said Don Quixote, that, coming here like a cast, I couldn't stop telling you. Ah, rapist gentleman, and how blind is he who does not see through sieve cloth. I, Mr. Barber, am not Neptune, the god of the waters, nor do I try to make anyone consider me discreet when I am not, I only tire myself to make the world understand the error in which it is in not renewing in itself the most happy time when the order of the errant chivalry reigned. But our depraved age is not worthy of enjoying as much good as that enjoyed by the ages when the knights errant took charge and put on their backs the defence of the kingdoms, the protection of the maidens, the help of the orphans and wards, the punishment of the proud and the reward of the humble. All these knights, and many others that I could say, Sir Priest, were knights errant, light and glory of the cavalry. These, or such as these, I would like to be those of my choice, that, if they were, his majesty would find himself well served and save much expense, and the Turk would be left peeling his beard, and with this, I do not want to remain in my house, because the chaplain won't take me out of it, and if his Jupiter, as the barber said, does not rain, here I am, it will rain when I feel like it. Replied the priest, I say that my scruple is that I cannot in any way persuade myself that the entire throng of knights errant that your grace, Señor Don Quixote, has referred to, have really and truly been people of flesh and blood in the past world. Before, I imagine that everything is fiction, fable, and lies, and dreams told by awake men, or, better to say, half asleep. That is another mistake, responded Don Quixote, into which many have fallen, who do not believe that there have been such knights in the world, and many times, with different people and occasions, I have tried to bring to light this almost common deception. Which truth is so certain, that I am about to say that with my own eyes I saw Amadis de Gaula, who was a tall man with a white face, a well-groomed beard, albeit a black one, between soft and rigorous eyesight, short of reasons, slow to anger and quick to lay down anger. And, without a doubt, that this was like a prophecy, that poets are also called vates, which means diviners. And, in this, they heard that the mistress and the niece, who had already left the conversation, gave loud voices in the patio, and they all went to the noise. Chapter 2. Which deals with the remarkable quarrel that Sancho Panza had with Don Quixote's niece and mistress, with other funny events. The voices were from the niece and mistress, who gave them saying to Sancho Panza, that he was struggling to enter to see Don Quixote, and they defended him. You will not enter here, sack of wickedness and sack of malice. Go govern your house and work your pegueries, and stop pretending to be insulas or insulas. But Don Quixote called him and made the two keep quiet and let him enter. I am very sorry, Sancho, that you have said and say that I was the one who got you out of your head, knowing that I did not stay in my houses, together we went out, together we went and together we pilgrimage, the same fortune and the same fate have befallen both of them, if they beat you once, they beat me 100, and this is what gives you an advantage. That when the head aches, all the limbs ache, and thus, being I your master and lord, I am your head, and you my part, since you are my servant, and, for this reason, the evil that touches me, or will touch me, will hurt you, and yours will hurt me. Sancho friend, what do they say about me because of that place? In what opinion do the common people have me, in what the hidalgos and in what the gentlemen? Tell me what about this has reached your ears, and this you have to tell me without adding anything to the good or taking anything away from the bad, that of loyal vassals it is to tell the truth to their lords in their own being and figure, without flattery increasing it or another vain respect diminishing it. It is that the common people consider your grace to be a great madman, and me to be no less foolish. The hidalgos say that, your worship not containing itself within the limits of hidalgia, he has put on a gift and has attacked himself as a gentleman with 4 vines and 2 yokes of earth and with a rag behind and another in front. The gentlemen say that they would not want the hidalgos to oppose them, especially those hidalgos escudrales who smoke the shoes and take the points of the black stockings with green silk. To the bravery, courtesy, exploits, and matter of your mercy, there are different opinions. Some say, crazy, but funny; others, brave, but miserable; others, polite, but impertinent. Last night the son of Bartolome Carrasco arrived, who came from Salamanca to study, graduated from high school, and, going to welcome him, he told me that the history of your grace was already in books, with the name of the ingenious hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, and he says that they lie to me in it with my very name of Sancho Panza, and to Mrs. Dulcinea del Toboso, with other things that we spent alone. But if your grace likes me to make him come here, I'll go for him on wings. And, leaving his master, he went to look for the bachelor, with whom he returned from there a short distance away, and between the 3 of them they had a most amusing conversation. Chapter 3. Of the ridiculous reasoning that passed between Don Quixote, Sancho Panza, and the bachelor Samson Carrasco. With this he somewhat consoled himself, but it disconsolate him to think that the author of it was a Moor, according to that name of side, and from the Moors no truth could be expected, because they are all deceivers, forgers, and chimerists. It was the bachelor, although his name was Samson, not very large in body, although very great sly, pale color, but very good understanding. He, kneeling before him, said, "Give me your greatness your hands, Señor Don Quixote de la Mancha, well beside Hamet Benengeli, that the history of your greatness left written, and just be curious that he was careful to have them translated from Arabic into our vulgar Castilian, for the universal entertainment of the people. That today more than 12,000 books of such history are printed, if not, say Portugal, Barcelona and Valencia, where they have been printed. If for good fame and if for good name it goes, they were careful to paint us very vividly the gallantry of your grace, the great spirit in undertaking dangers, both in misfortunes and in injuries, honesty and continence in love so platonic of your mercy and my lady Dona Dulcinea del Toboso. What exploits of mine are the most weighted in that story? Some stick to the adventure of the windmills, which seem to your grace to be breweries and giants; others, to that of the fullers; this, to the description of the 2 armies, which later appeared to be 2 herds of rams, that one makes more expensive the one of the deceased that they took to Segovia to bury; one says that the liberty of the galley slaves is superior to all of them; another, that none equals that of the 2 blessed giants, with the brawl of the brave Biscayan. With all that, replied the bachelor, some who have read the story say that the authors of it would have forgotten some of the infinite sticks that they gave to Mr. Don Quixote in different encounters. That's where the truth of the story comes in, said Sancho. They could also silence them out of fairness, said Don Quixote, because actions that neither change nor alter the truth of history have no reason to write them down, if they are to result in contempt for the Lord of history. A fee that Aeneas was not as pious as Virgil paints him, nor was Ulysses as prudent as Homer describes him. That's right, replied Samson, but one is to write as a poet and the other as a historian. The poet can tell, or sing things, not as they were, but as they should be, and the historian has to write them, not as they should be, but as they were, without adding or subtracting anything from the truth. And me, said Sancho, who also say that I am one of her main characters. God give me a bad day, Sancho, replied the bachelor, if you're not the second person in the story, and that there is such, that it is more precious to hear you speak than to the most painted of all of it, since there are also those who say that you were too credulous in believing that the government of that island, offered by Mr. Don Quixote, could be true, which is present. There is still sun on the fences, said Don Quixote, and the older Sancho gets, with the experience that the years give, the more suitable and more capable he will be to be a governor who is not here now. It is so clear that there is nothing to be difficult about it, the children grope it, the boys read it, the men understand it and the old people celebrate it. Indeed, what I reach, Mr. Bachelor, is that to compose stories and books, whatever they may be, a great judgment and a mature understanding are necessary. Saying thanks and writing donneurs is of great ingenuity. The most discreet figure in comedy is that of the fool, because the one who wants to imply that he is simple does not have to be. History is like a sacred thing, because it must be true, and where the truth is, God is, as far as truth is concerned, but, notwithstanding this, there are some who thus compose and throw books of themselves as if they were fritters. There isn't a book so bad, said the bachelor, that it doesn't have something good in it. There is no doubt about that, replied Don Quixote, but many times it happens that those who had deservedly earned and achieved great fame for their writings, by giving them to print, lost it completely, or undermined it in some way. The reason for this is, said Samson, that, as printed works are looked at slowly, Their faults are easily seen, and the more they are scrutinized the greater the fame of the one who composed them. The men famous for their wits, the great poets, the illustrious historians, always, or more often than not, are envied by those who have the pleasure and particular entertainment of judging the writings of others, without having given some of their own to the light of the world. That is not surprising, said Don Quixote, because there are many theologians who are not good for the pulpit, and they are very good at knowing the faults or leftovers of those who preach. All this is so, Señor Don Quixote, said Carrasco, but I would like such censors to be more merciful and less scrupulous, without sticking to the atoms of the very clear sun of the work they murmur about. Sancho answered, I, Señor Sanson, am not here now to get into accounts or stories, that he's made me sick to my stomach, that if I don't fix him with 2 drinks of the Injo, he'll put me on Santa Lucia's thorn. And, without waiting for an answer or another word, he went to his house. Chapter 4. Where Sancho Panza satisfies the bachelor Sanson Carrasco with his doubts and questions, with other events worth knowing and telling. Sancho returned to Don Quixote's house and, returning to past reasoning, said, to which Mr. Sanson said that he wanted to know what happened to the 100 shields. Did they get rid of? Sancho replied, I spent them on behalf of myself and my wife and my children, and they have been the cause of my wife patiently following the paths and careers that I have traveled in the service of my lord Don Quixote. Sancho had hardly finished saying these reasons when Rocinante's neighing reached his ears, which Don Quixote took neighing for a most happy omen, and he determined to make another departure from there in 3 or 4 days. The bachelor replied that it was his opinion that he should go to the kingdom of Aragon and to the city of Zaragoza, where, in a few days, they were going to hold some very solemn jests for the feast of St. George. He praised him for being most honorable and courageous in his determination, and warned him to be more vigilant in undertaking the dangers, because his life was not his own, but that of all those who needed him to protect them and help them in misfortunes. Of the body of the world, Mr. Bachelor. Yes, what times are there to undertake and times to withdraw? Yes, it doesn't have to be all Santiago, and close, Spain. And more, that I have heard say, that in the extremes of cowardice and recklessness is the means of courage. Look, Sancho, said Samson, that trades change customs, and it could be that seeing you governor you don't know the mother who gave birth to you. That has to be understood there, answered Sancho, with those who were born in the hollyhocks, and not with those who have 4 fingers of old Christian substance on their souls, as I do. Having said this, he begged the bachelor, if he was a poet, to do him the favor of composing some verses dealing with the farewell he planned to give to his wife Dulcinea del Toboso. They agreed on this and that the departure would be 8 days from then. Don Quixote commissioned the bachelor to keep it a secret, especially the priest and Master Nicholas, and his niece and his mistress, so that they would not hinder his honest and courageous determination. Chapter V. Of the discreet and funny talk that took place between Sancho Panza and his wife, Teresa Panza, and other events worthy of happy remembrance. Sancho arrived at his house so rejoiced and happy that his wife knew his joy from a crossbow shot. Look, Teresa, replied Sancho, I am happy because I am determined to once again serve my master Don Quixote, who wants the 3rd time to go out in search of adventures, and I go out with him again, because my need wants it that way. Look, Sancho, replied Teresa, after you became a member of a knight-errant, you talk in such a roundabout way that no one understands you. I tell you, woman, replied Sancho, that if I did not think before long to see myself governor of an island, here I would drop dead. Not that, my husband, said Teresa, long live the chicken, even if it's with her nugget, long live, and the devil take how many governments there are in the world. Without government you came out of your mother's womb, without government you have lived until now, and without government you will go, or they will take you, to the grave when God is served. Like those there are in the world who live without government, and for that reason they do not stop living and being counted in the number of people. The best sauce in the world is hunger, and as this is not lacking to the poor, they always eat with pleasure. But look, Sancho, if by any chance you come across a government, don't forget me and your children. Note that Sanchico is already 15 full years old, and it is reason for him to go to school, if his uncle the abbot is going to let him become a member of the church. Also take note that Mari Sancha, your daughter, will not die if we marry her, that she is giving me inklings that she wants to have a husband as much as you want to see you with a government, and, finally, she better looks like the badly married daughter than the well-married one. In good faith, replied Sancho, that if God manages to have me something of a government, that I have to marry, my wife, Mari Sancha so highly that they will not reach her except by calling her lady. Not that, Sancho, answered Teresa, marry her with hers just like hers, which is the most appropriate thing to do, that if you take her out of the clogs, the girl will not be found, and at every step she will fall into 1,000 faults, discovering the thread of her coarse cloth. By the way, it would be a nice thing to marry our Maria to a condizo, or to a gentleman who, whenever he felt like it, would put her as new, calling her a villain, daughter of the lumpy Ripper and the Polaruicus. Not in my day, husband. For that, by the way, I have raised my daughter. Bring your money, Sancho, and leave her to marry me. Look, Teresa, I've always heard my elders say that he who doesn't know how to enjoy fortune when it comes to him, that he shouldn't complain if it goes away. And it would not be good that now, that she is knocking at our door, we close it, let us be carried away by this favorable wind that blows us. Don't you think, that it would be good to find my body in some profitable government that will get us out of the mud? And let Mari Sancha marry whoever I want, and you will see how they call you Dona Teresa Panza. You do what you want, whether you make her a duchess or a princess, but I can tell you that it will not be with my will or consent. Teresa they gave me at baptism, a modest and concise name, without additions, or curtailments, or garnish of gifts or donuts. And I don't want to give anything to say to those who see me dressed like a count or a governor, who will later say, look how in tone the peace pig is, yesterday she couldn't get enough of stretching out a flake of toe, and she went to mass covered her head with the skirt of her saya, instead of a cloak, and today she goes with a vest, with brooches, and in tune, as if we didn't know her. You, brother, go to be government or insular, and tone up to your liking, that neither my daughter nor I, for the sake of my mother's century, that we should not move a step from our village, the honest woman, the broken leg, and at home, and the honest maiden, to do something is her feast. Whence it arises that, when we see some well-groomed person, and with richly dressed clothes, and with the pomp of servants, it seems that by force it moves us and invites us to have respect for them, since memory at that moment represents to us some lowliness in which we saw such a person, which in Omnia, now it is of poverty or of lineage, as it already happened, it is not, and it is only what we see present. And if this one whom fortune brought from the eraser of his lowliness, for these very reasons the father said it, to the highness of his prosperity, were well-bred, liberal and courteous with everyone, and did not put himself in stories with those who by antiquity they are noble, rest assured, Teresa, that there will be no one who remembers what was, but who reveres what is, if they are not the envious, of whom no prosperous fortune is certain. I don't understand you, husband, replied Teresa, do what you want, and don't break my head any more with your harangues and rhetoric. Send your money, Teresa said, and I'll dress it up like a heart of palm. Indeed, we agreed, said Sancho, that our daughter should be countess. The day I see her, countess, replied Teresa, that day I'll bury her, but again I tell you to do what pleases you, that we women are born with this burden, to be obedient to their husbands, even if they are some joints. And, at this, she began to cry as truly as if she already saw Sanchica dead and buried. Sancho consoled her by telling her that, since she was to make her a countess, he would do everything for her as late as she could. With this, her conversation ended, and Sancho returned to see Don Quixote to order his departure. Chapter 6. About what happened to Don Quixote with his niece and his mistress, and it is one of the important chapters of the whole story. Don Quixote's niece and mistress were not idle, for by 1,000 signs they were deducing that their uncle and lord wanted to tear himself apart for the third time, and return to the exercise of his, for them, evil errant cavalry. They tried in every possible way to separate him of such bad thoughts, but everything was preaching in the desert and crushing in cold iron. "Oh my lord," said the niece at this time, "your grace should note that everything you say about the knights errant is a fable and a lie." "By the God who sustains me," said Don Quixote, "that if you were not my rightful niece, as the daughter of my own sister, who would inflict such a punishment on you, for the blasphemy you have said, that it would sound all over the world. How is it possible that a young girl who barely knows how to wiggle 12 ronda sticks dares to put her tongue out and censor the stories of the knights errant? Not all those who call themselves knights are all things, some are made of gold, others of alchemy, and they all seem like knights, but not all of them can be at the touch of the stone of truth. There are short men who burst to look like gentlemen, and there are tall gentlemen who seem to die for looking like short men, those rise up or with ambition or with virtue, these lower themselves or with laziness or with vice, and it is necessary to take advantage of discreet knowledge to distinguish these two manners of gentlemen, so similar in names and so distant in actions. Look, friends, to 4 sorts of lineages, and pay attention to me. All those in the world can be reduced, which are these: some, who had humble beginnings, and went on spreading and dilating until they reached great greatness; others, who had great principles, and kept them and continue to keep them in the being they began; others, who, although they had great beginnings, ended up in a point, like a pyramid, having reduced and annihilated their beginning until they stopped at nothing, as is the point of the pyramid, which with respect to its base or seat is nothing. There are others, and these are the most, who neither had a good beginning nor a reasonable middle, and so they will have an end, without a name, like the lineage of the plebeian and ordinary people. Of the first, which had a humble beginning and rose to the greatness that they now retain, the Ottoman house serves as an example, which, from a humble and lowly shepherd who gave it its beginning, is at the summit that we see. Of the second lineage, which had its beginning in greatness and preserves it without increasing it, many princes will be an example who by inheritance are great, and are preserved in it, without increasing or diminishing it, peacefully containing themselves within the limits of their states. There are thousands of examples of those who started out great and ended up at the top, because all the pharaohs and Ptolemies of Egypt, the Caesars of Rome, with the whole host, if they can be given this name, of infinite princes, monarchs, lords, Medes, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks and barbarians, all these lineages and lordships have ended in point and nothing, both they and those who gave them beginning, because it will not be possible to find any of their descendants now, and if we found him, it would be in low and humble state. Of the plebeian lineage I have nothing to say, but that it serves only to increase the number of those who live, without their greatness meriting any other fame or praise. From all that has been said, I want you to infer, my fools, that there is great confusion between lineages, and that only those seem great and illustrious that show it in virtue, and in the wealth and liberality of their owners. I said virtues, riches, and liberalities, because the great one who is vicious will be vicious great, and the illiberal rich man will be a miser beggar, that the possessor of wealth does not make him happy by having it, but by spending it, and not by spending it as he pleases, but by knowing how to spend it well. The poor gentleman has no other way to show that he is a gentleman than that of virtue, being affable, well-bred, courteous and restrained, and officious, not arrogant, not murmuring, and, above all, charitable. There are two paths, daughters, by which men can go to become rich and honorable, one is that of letters, another, that of weapons. I have more arms than letters, and I was born, as I am inclined to arms, under the influence of the planet Mars, so, it is almost forced me to continue on his path, and for him I have to go in spite of everyone, and it will be in vain to tire you in persuading me not to want what the heavens want, fortune orders and reason asks, and, above all, my will desires. Well, with knowing, as I do, the innumerable jobs that are attached to knight-errantry, I also know the infinite goods that are achieved with it, and I know that the path of virtue is very narrow, and the path of vice, wide and spacious, and I know that their ends and whereabouts are different, because that of vice, dilated and spacious, ends in death, and that of virtue, narrow and laborious, ends in life, and not in the life that ends, but in the one that it will have no end, and I know, as our great Castilian poet says, that through these asperities one walks from immortality to the high seat, where he who declines from there never rises. Oh, unfortunate me, said the niece, for my lord is also a poet. He knows everything, he reaches everything, I'll bet that if he wanted to be a bricklayer, that he knew how to make a house like a cage. At this time, they knocked at the door, and, asking who was knocking, Sancho Panza replied that it was him, and hardly had the mistress met him, when she ran to hide so as not to see him, she hated him so much. Her niece opened the door for him, her mistress Don Quixote came out to receive him with her open arms, and the two shut themselves up in her room, where they had another conversation, which the past did not do him any good. Chapter 7. What happened to Don Quixote with his squire, with other famous events. Imagining that the resolution of his third party would come out of that consultation, he went to look for the bachelor Sanson Carrasco, thinking that, since he was well-spoken and a fresh friend of his mistress, he could persuade him to abandon such a crazy purpose. And with this, the housekeeper left, and the bachelor then went to look for the priest, to communicate with him what will be said at his time. In which Don Quixote and Sancho were locked up. Sir, I already have my wife ready to let me go with your grace wherever you want to take me. It is the case, replied Sancho, that, as your grace knows best, we are all subject to death, and that today we are and tomorrow we are not, and that the lamb goes as quickly as the ram, and that no one can promise himself in this the world more hours of life than God wants to give it, because death is deaf, and when it comes knocking at the doors of our life, it always goes fast and no prayers, no forces, no scepters, no miters will make it stop. According to public voice and fame, and according to what they tell us from those pulpits. I am going to stop at your worship indicating a known salary of what you will give me each month for the time that I serve you, and that such salary be paid to me from his hacienda, that I don't want to be at mercy, that they arrive late, or badly, or never, God help me with mine. That your grace give me the island that you have promised me, that I will not want the amount of income from such an island to be appreciated, and that she deduct from my salary a cat by quantity. But I don't recall reading that any knight-errant has appointed his squire a known salary. I only know that they all served at mercy, and that, when they least expected it, if luck had gone well for their masters, they found themselves rewarded with an insula, or something else equivalent, and, at least, they were left with a title and lordship. So, my Sancho, go back to your house and tell your Teresa my intention, and if she likes her and you like to be at my mercy. And if not, as friends as before, that if the dovecot does not lack bait, it will not lack pigeons. When Sancho heard the firm resolution of his mistress, the sky clouded over him and the wings of his heart fell, because he believed that his mistress would not leave without him for all the assets in the world. And so, being suspenseful and thoughtful, Samson Carrasco and his niece entered. Samson told him, "Pray to Almighty God, where it is contained the longest, that the person or persons who put an impediment and hinder your third exit, that they do not find it in the labyrinth of their desires, nor that what they badly desire never be fulfilled." And, turning to the mistress, he said to her, "I know that it is a precise determination of the spheres that Don Quixote once again carry out his lofty and new thoughts, and I would charge my conscience very much if I did not intimate and persuade this gentleman not to have more time shrunk and stop the strength of his brave arm and the goodness of his courageous spirit. Hey, my lord Don Quixote, handsome and brave, sooner today than tomorrow your grace and your greatness set out on the road, and if something is missing to put it into execution, here I am to supply it with my person and property, and if it were necessary to serve your magnificence as a squire, I will happily have it." At this point, Don Quixote said, turning to Sancho, "Didn't I tell you, Sancho, that I would have plenty of squires?" "Yes, worthy," replied Sancho, moved and his eyes full of tears, and he continued, "and so, there is nothing more to do, but that your grace order your testament with your codicil, in such a way that you cannot wallow, and then let us set out, so that Mr. Samson's soul does not suffer, that he persuade your grace to go out for the third time in that world, and I again offer myself to serve your mercy faithfully and legally." Finally, Don Quixote and Sancho embraced and became friends, and with the opinion and approval of the great Carrasco, who at that time was his oracle, it was ordered that 3 days from now he should leave, in which there would be a place to prepare what was necessary for the trip, and to look for a lace headpiece. Samson offered it to him, because he knew a friend of his who had it would not deny it to him. The curses that the two, mistress and niece, cast on the bachelor were untold. Ultimately, during those 3 days, Don Quixote and Sancho accommodated themselves to what seemed to suit them, and, having placated his wife, and Don Quixote his niece and her mistress, at nightfall, without anyone seeing him except the bachelor, who wanted to accompany them half a league from the place, they set out on the road to Toboso, Don Quixote on his good Rocinante, and Sancho on his old Dapple. Samson went around his place, and the two took the one in the great city of Toboso. Chapter 8. In which is told what happened to Don Quixote, going to see his lady Dulcinea del Toboso. "Sancho my friend, the night is getting closer and darker than we needed to be able to see El Toboso by day, where I have determined to go before I set out on another adventure, and there I will take the blessing and good license of the peerless Dulcinea. O envy, root of infinite evils and rottenness of virtues. All vices, Sancho, bring and I don't know what kind of delight, but that of envy brings nothing but disgust, resentment, and rage. Tell me, sir, those Julios or Agostos, and all those brave knights that he has said, who are already dead, where are they now? The Gentiles are certainly in hell, Christians, if they were good Christians, are either in purgatory or in heaven." "Very well," said Sancho, "but now let us know, do these tombs where the bodies of those great gentlemen are lie, do they have silver lamps in front of them, or are the walls of their chapels adorned with crutches, shrouds, hair, legs and wax eyes? And if not, what are they adorned with?" To which Don Quixote replied, "The tombs of the Gentiles were for the most part sumptuous temples, the ashes of Julius Caesar's body were placed on a stone pyramid of disproportionate grandeur." "I mean," said Sancho, "that we give ourselves over to being saints, and we will more quickly achieve the good reputation we seek, and note, sir, that yesterday or the day before yesterday. So, my lord, it is better to be a humble little friar, of whatever order, than a brave and knight-errant. More than 24 disciplines are enough with God than 2000 launched, sometimes they give them to giants, sometimes to vestiges or andariagos. But not all of us can be friars, and there are many paths through which God leads his own to heaven. Religion is chivalry, holy knights are in glory." "Yes," replied Sancho, "but I have heard that there are more friars in heaven than knights errant." "That is," responded Don Quixote, "because the number of religious is greater than that of the knights." "Many are the wanderers," said Sancho. "Many," responded Don Quixote, "but few who deserve the name of knights." Anyway, another day, at nightfall, they discovered the great city of Toboso. Finally, Don Quixote ordered them to enter the city late at night, and until the hour came, they stayed among some holm oaks that were near El Toboso. Chapter 9. Where is told what will be seen in it. It was almost midnight, a little more or less, when Don Quixote and Sancho left the mountain and entered El Toboso. "Sancho, son, guide Dulcinea to the palace, perhaps it could be that we find her awake." "Come here, heretic, have I not told you 1,000 times that in all the days of my life I have not seen the peerless Dulcinea, nor have I ever crossed the threshold of her palace, and that I am only in love with hearsay and with the great fame that has of beautiful and discreet?" "Now I hear it," replied Sancho, "and I say that, since your worship has not seen it, nor have I." "That cannot be," replied Don Quixote, that, at least, you have already told me that you saw her making wheat, when you brought me the answer to the letter that I sent with you. Don't limit yourself to that, sir, replied Sancho, because I let you know that the hearing and the answer I gave you were also heard, because, that way I know who Mrs. Dulcinea is like giving a fist in the sky. While the two of them were having these talks, they saw that she was coming to pass by where one of them was with 2 mules. Can you tell me, good friend, may God give you good fortune, where are the palaces of the peerless Princess Dona Dulcinea del Toboso around here? Sir, replied the young man, I am a stranger and I have been in this town for a few days, serving a rich farmer in the fields. The local priest and sacristan live in that frontier house. Both of them, or any of them, will know how to give your grace the reason for the princess, because they have a list of all the residents of Toboso. Sir, the day is coming to an end, it will be better that we get out of the city, and that your grace ambushes in some nearby forest, and I will return during the day, and I will not leave a trace in all this place where I do not look for the house, castle, or palace of my lady, and you would be unhappy if you didn't find it, and, finding him, I will speak with her grace, and I will tell her where and how your grace is waiting for her to give order and plan to see her, without detriment to her honor and fame. The advice that you have now given me appeals to him and I receive with great pleasure. Sancho was furious at getting his mistress out of town, because he hadn't figured out the lie in Dulcinea's response that had taken him to Sierra Morena, and so he hastened to leave, which he left later, and 2 miles from the place they found a forest, where Don Quixote lay in ambush while Sancho returned to the city to speak to Dulcinea. Chapter X. Where the industry that Sancho had to enchant Mrs. Dulcinea is told, and other events as ridiculous as true. Because the truth thins and does not break, and always walks on the lie like oil on water. Go on, son, replied Don Quixote, and do not be disturbed when you see yourself before the light of the beautiful sun that you are going to seek. I'll go and I'll be back soon, said Sancho. Being, then, crazy, as he is, and mad that more often than not he takes one thing for another, it won't be very difficult to make him believe that a farmer, the first one I come across here, is Mrs. Dulcinea. When he got up to get on the dapple, he saw that 3 peasant women were coming from Toboso towards where he was. Just as Sancho saw the peasant women, at a brisk pace he returned to look for his lord Don Quixote, and found him sighing and saying 1,000 loving lamentations. So good, answered Sancho, that all you have to do is bite Rocinante and go out into the open to see the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, who with 2 other maidens of hers comes to see your grace. Peek, sir, and come, and you will see the princess come, our mistress, dressed and adorned, in short, like who she is. Her maidens and she are all a golden ember. Already in this they left the jungle, and discovered the 3 villagers nearby. I don't see, Sancho, said Don Quixote, except 3 farmers on 3 donkeys. Shut up, sir, said Sancho, don't say such a word, but wake up those eyes, and come and bow to the lady of her thoughts, for she is already close to her. And, dismounting from the dapple, he held by the halter the ass of one of the 3 peasant women, and, sinking both knees on the ground, he said, Queen and Princess and Duchess of Beauty, may your arrogance and greatness be served to receive in his grace and good talent to your captive knight, who there is made of marble stone, all disturbed and without pulses to see himself before your magnificent presence. I am Sancho Panza, his squire, and he is the dishonest knight Don Quixote de la Mancha. At this time, Don Quixote had already dropped to his knees next to Sancho, and he looked with wild eyes and troubled eyes at what Sancho called queen and lady. Move aside, Nora, out of the way, and let us pass, we're going fast. Don Quixote said at this point, I see that fortune, not fed up with my evil, has taken all the paths through which some contentment can come to this petty soul that I have in the flesh. And you, O extreme of value that can be desired, and of human kindness, only remedy for this afflicted heart that adores you, since the evil enchanter persecutes me, and has put clouds and cataracts in my eyes, and for them alone and not for others it has changed and transformed your unparalleled beauty and face into that of a poor farmer, if mine too has not changed into that of some vestige, to make it abhorrent to your eyes, do not stop looking at me softly and lovingly. Take that, my grandfather, replied the villager. Little friend, I am the one to hear cracks. Stand back and let us go, and we'll thank you. Sancho stepped aside and let her go, very happy to have come out of her tangle well. As soon as the village woman who had made the figure of Dulcinea was freed, when she, stinging her Canaanite with a stinger that she carried on a stick, she began to run ahead across the meadow. And, as her donkey felt the point of the sting, which fatigued her more than usual, she began to buck, so that she hit Mrs. Dulcinea on the ground, which, seen by Don Quixote, he went to pick her up. The lady, getting up from the ground, relieved him of that work, because, going back a little, he took a bullfight, and, placing both hands on the donkey's haunches, he struck his body, lighter than a falcon, on the pack saddle, and stood astride. And that was the truth, because, seeing Dulcinea on horseback, they all charged after her and shot to run, without turning their heads behind her for more than half a league. Don Quixote followed them with his eyes, and, when he saw that they did not appear, turning to Sancho, he said to him, "Sancho, what do you think about how bad I am when it comes to charmers? And look how far their malice extends and the resentment they have for me, because they have wanted to deprive me of the happiness that seeing my lady in her being could give me. These traitors were not satisfied with having returned and transformed my Dulcinea, but they transformed her and turned her into a figure as low and as ugly as that villager's, and together they took away from her what is so much hers among the principal ladies, which is the good smell, for always walking among ambers and among flowers. O scoundrel!" Sancho shouted at this moment. Fed up he had to do Sancho's sarcasm in hiding his laughter, listening to the nonsense of his mistress, so delicately deceived. Finally, after many other reasons that passed between the two, they got back on their beasts, and continued on the road to Zaragoza. Chapter 11. Of the strange adventure that happened to the brave Don Quixote with the car, or wagon, of the courts of death. Thoughtful also, Don Quixote went on his way forward, considering the bad mockery that the enchanters had made him, turning his lady Dulcinea into the bad figure of the village girl. "Sir, sorrows were not made for beasts, but for men, but if men feel them too much, they turn into beasts. Your worship report back, and come to your senses, and take Rocinante's reins, and revive and wake up, and show that gallantry that is appropriate for knights errant to have. One thing weighs me down, my lord, more than others, which is to think about what means to have when your grace defeats some giant or other gentleman, and orders him to present himself before the beauty of Mrs. Dulcinea. Where is this poor giant to find her, or this poor and miserable defeated gentleman?" To answer, Don Quixote wanted Sancho Panza, but he was hindered by a cart that came across the road. The one who drove the mules and served as the driver was an ugly devil. He came in the open wagon to the open sky, without awning or hurdle. The first figure that presented itself to Don Quixote's eyes was that of Death himself, with a human face. Next to her came an angel with large, painted wings. To one side was an emperor with a crown, apparently of gold, on his head. At the feet of Death was the god they call Cupid, without a blindfold, but with his bow, quiver, and arrows. Also came a knight armed to the nines. With these came other people with different suits and faces. But then Don Quixote rejoiced, believing that some new and dangerous adventure was being offered to him. "Carter, coachman, or devil, or whatever you are, do not delay in telling me who you are, where you are going and who are the people you have in your carriage." "Sir, we are reciters of the company of Angulo el Malo. We have done in a place that is behind that hill this morning, and we will do it this afternoon in that place that looks like it from here, and, to be so close and to excuse the work of undressing and dressing again, we leave dressed in the same dresses that we represent. By the faith of a knight errant, that just as I saw this chariot, I imagined that some great adventure was offered to me, and now I say that it is necessary to touch appearances with the hand to give rise to disappointment. Walk with God, good people, and have your party." During these talks, as luck would have it, one of the company arrived, dressed as a bojiganga, with many bells, and on the end of a stick he brought 3 swollen cow bladders, which upstart, approaching Don Quixote, began to wield the stick and shake the ground with his bladders, and jump up and down, ringing the bells, whose poor eyesight thus upset Rocinante, who, without being able to stop Don Quixote, taking the brake between his teeth, he began to run across the field with more lightness than the bones of his notomy ever promised. Sancho, who considered the danger his mistress was in of being knocked down, jumped from the dapple, and hurriedly went to help her, but, when he reached him, he was already on the ground, and next to him, Rocinante, who, with his mistress, came to the ground. But hardly had Sancho left his cavalry to go to Don Quixote, when the dancing demon of the bladders jumped on the grey, and, shaking him with them, the fear and noise, more than the pain of the blows, made him fly through the mouth campaign to the place where they were going to have the party. Helping him climb onto Rocinante, he told him, "Sir, the devil has taken the dapple." "What a devil?" Don Quixote asked. "The one with the bladders," replied Sancho. "Well, I'll charge him," replied Don Quixote. "There's no point in doing that, sir," answered Sancho, "your grace tempers his anger, for, it seems to me, the devil has already left the dapple, and is returning to his love." And so it was the truth, because, the devil having fallen with the dapple, to imitate Don Quixote and Rocinante, the devil went on foot to the town, and the donkey returned to his master. "With all that," said Don Quixote, "it would be good to punish the demon's disrespect for one of those in the wagon, even if it is the emperor himself." And, saying this, he returned to the cart, which was already very close to the town. He was shouting, saying, "Stop, wait, happy and rejoicing mob, I want you to understand how donkeys and vermin that serve as cavalry to the squires of the knights errant should be treated." In an instant Death jumped out of the cart. The emperor, the road devil and the angel, and they all loaded themselves with stones and stood on a wing, hoping to receive Don Quixote on the tips of their pebbles. Don Quixote stopped Rocinante's reins and began to think how he would attack them with less danger to his person. A sense of madness would be to attempt such an undertaking. Among all those who are there, although they seem kings, princes, and emperors, there is no knight-errant. Now yes, said Don Quixote, you have hit, Sancho, at the point where I can and must change my already determined intent. I cannot and should not draw my sword, as I have told you many times before, against anyone who is not armed as a knight. It's up to you, Sancho. If you want to take revenge for the wrong that has been done to your grey, I'll help you from here with salutary voices and warnings. There's no point, sir, answered Sancho, taking revenge on anyone, because it's not good Christians to take it from grievances, the more, that I will finish off my ass that puts his offence in the hands of my will, which is to live peacefully the days that the heavens give me of life. Let's leave these ghosts and go back to search for better and more qualified adventures. Chapter 12. Of the strange adventure that befell the brave Don Quixote with the brave Knight of Mirrors. The night that followed the day of the reunion of death was spent by Don Quixote and his squire under some tall and shady trees. The scepters and crowns of the phony emperors, answered Sancho Panza, were never made of pure gold, but of tinsel or tin foil. That's true, replied Don Quixote, because it wasn't right that the trappings of comedy were fine, but feigned and apparent, as comedy itself is, with which I want you to be well, Sancho, having it in your grace. And consequently to those who represent them and to those who compose them, because they are all instruments of doing great good to the Republic, putting up a mirror for us at each step forward, where the actions of human life are seen live, and there is no comparison that more live represents what we are and what we have to be like comedy and comedians. If not, tell me, have you not seen a comedy performed where kings, emperors, and pontiffs, knights, ladies and various other characters are introduced? One plays the ruffian, another the liar, this one the merchant, that one the soldier, another the simple discreet, another the simple lover, and, once the comedy is finished and stripping off their dresses, all the reciters remain the same. Yes, I have seen, answered Sancho. Well, the same thing, said Don Quixote, happens in the comedy and treatment of this world, where some play the emperors, others the pontiffs, and, finally, all the figures that can be introduced in a comedy, but, at the end, which is when life ends, death takes away the clothes that differentiated them all, and they remain the same in the grave. Brave comparison, said Sancho, although not so new that I haven't heard it many and many times, like that of the game of chess, that, while the game lasts, each piece has its particular job, and, at the end of the game, they all mix, join and shuffle, and find them in a bag, which is like finding life in the grave. There is no friend for a friend, reeds become spears, and the other who sang, from friend to friend the bug, etc. Having compared the friendship of these animals to that of men, that men have received many warnings from the beasts and learned many important things, such as, from the storks, the crystal, of dogs, vomiting and gratitude, of the cranes, vigilance, from the ants, providence, of the elephants, honesty and loyalty, of the horse. Don Quixote dozing to the one of a robust oak, but, little time had passed, when he was awakened by a noise that he heard behind him, and, getting up with a start, he began to look and listen to where the noise came from, and he saw that they were two men on horseback, and that the one, allowing himself to be thrown from the saddle, said to the other, "Get down, friend, and take the bridles off the horses, for, in my opinion, this place abounds with grass for them, and with the silence and solitude that my loving thoughts have required." Saying this and lying on the ground all happened at the same time, and, as he threw himself, the weapons with which he was armed made a noise, a clear sign from where Don Quixote knew that he must have been a knight-errant. With a sorrowful and hurt voice, he said, "Oh, the most beautiful and the most ungrateful woman in the world! How is it possible, most serene Casilda of Vandalia, that you have to allow this captive knight of yours to be consumed and end up in continual pilgrimages and harsh and hard work? Isn't it enough that I've had all the knights of Navarre confess you as the most beautiful in the world, and, finally, all the knights of La Mancha? Not that," said Don Quixote at this point, "for I am from La Mancha and have never confessed that. Who goes there? That people? Is it by chance that of the number of the happy, or that of the afflicted?" "Of the afflicted," answered Don Quixote. "Well, come to me." Don Quixote, who was seen responding so tenderly and measuredly, went over to him, and Sancho no more and no less. "Sit down here, Sir Knight, for to understand that you are, and of those who profess to be chivalry errantry, it is enough for me to have found you in this place. I am a gentleman, and of the profession you mention, and, although sorrows, misfortunes and misfortunes have their own seat in my soul, the compassion I have for other people's misfortunes has not been driven away from it. By chance, Sir Knight," the forest man asked Don Quixote, "are you in love?" By misfortune I am, answered Don Quixote, although the damages that are born from well-placed thoughts, should be considered graces rather than misfortunes. With this the two squires departed, and between them a conversation took place as graceful as the one between their lords was serious. Chapter 13. In which the adventure of the Knight of the Forest is continued, with the discreet, new, and gentle colloquium that passed between the two squires. Divided were knights and squires, these telling each other their lives, and those their loves. But the story first recounts the reasoning of the young men and then follows that of the masters. Working life is the one we spend and live, my lord, those of us who are squires of knights errant. Who is hotter and colder than the wretched squires of the cavalry errantry? All of this can be carried and entailed, with the hope that we have of the prize, because if the knight errant who is served by a squire is not too unhappy, at least a few strokes he will be rewarded with a beautiful government of any island, or with a good-looking county. Well, the truth is that your worship is wrong, said the one from the forest, because the island governments are not all of good standing. Some are crooked, some are poor, some malinconicos, and finally, the most upright and well-disposed brings with him a heavy load of thoughts and discomforts, which the unfortunate person who fell for him places on his shoulders. Far better it would be that those of us who profess this accursed servitude retire to our houses, and there entertain ourselves in gentler exercises. Really and truly, replied the one from the forest, Lord Squire, that I have proposed and determined to leave these drunkenness of these gentlemen, and retire to my village, and raise my little children, who have three like three oriental pearls. And to see them again I pray to God to save me from mortal sin, which will be the same if it saves me from this dangerous job of squire, in which I have incurred a second time, baited and cheated of a bag with 100 ducats that I found a day in the heart of Sierra Morena, who I know is more crazy than gentlemen. That's why, replied the one from the forest, they say that greed breaks the sack, and if he is going to deal with them, there is no one greater in the world than my master, because he is one of those who say, other people's care kills the donkey. Well, because another gentleman collects the judgment that he has lost, he plays the madman, and he goes looking for what I don't know if after he finds it he will come out to the snout. With your mercy I will be able to console myself, because he serves another master as foolish as mine. Foolish, but brave, replied the one from the forest, and more mischievous than foolish and brave. With all that, brother and lord, said the one from the forest, if the blind lead the blind, both are in danger of falling into the hole. It is better to retire with a good rhythm of feet, and return to our wishes, that those who seek adventures do not always find good ones. That's why I say, said the one from the forest, that we stop looking for adventures, and, since we have loaves, let's not look for cakes, and let's go back to our huts, that God will find us there, if he wants. Until my master arrives in Zaragoza, I will serve him, that later we will all understand each other. Chapter 14. Where the adventure of the Knight of the Forest continues. Finally, Sir Knight, I want you to know that my destiny, or, to put it better, my choice, brought me to fall in love with the incomparable Quixote de Vandalia. She calls her peerless because she does not have him, both in the greatness of her body and in the extreme of her state and beauty. In short, lately she has ordered me to go through all the provinces of Spain and make all the knights errant who wander through them confess that she alone is the most outstanding in beauty of those who live today. But what I pride myself on is having defeated, in a singular battle, that famous knight Don Quixote de la Mancha, and made him confess that my Quixote is more beautiful than her Dulcinea. That your worship, Sir Knight, has defeated the most knights errant in Spain, and even in the whole world, I say nothing, but whether he has defeated Don Quixote de la Mancha, I doubt it. You must know that this Don Quixote that you say is the greatest friend I have in this world, and so much so that I can say that I have him instead of myself. On the other hand, I see with my eyes and I touch with my hands, it would not be possible to be the same, if it were not that since he has many charming enemies, especially one that usually persecutes him, some of them had not taken his figure to let themselves be defeated. For defrauding him of the fame that his high cavalries have earned and acquired for everything discovered on earth. And if all this is not enough to inform you of this truth that I say, here is Don Quixote himself, who will support it with his weapons on foot, or on horseback, or in any way that pleases you. But, because it is not good for knights to do their deeds with dark weapons, like robbers and ruffians, let us wait for the day, so that the sun can see our works. And it must be a condition of our battle that the vanquished must remain at the will of the victor, so that he can do whatever he wants with him, as long as what is ordered is decent as a knight. On the way, El del Bosque said to Sancho, I'm saying this because I've been warned that while our owners quarrel, we too have to fight and break into splinters. I bring here 2 sacks of canvas, of the same size, you will take one, and I the other, and we will fight with sacks, with equal weapons. And in this way we will be able to protect ourselves without harming or hurting ourselves. But, even if they were filled with cocoons of silk, no, my lord, that I will not fight, let our masters fight, and there they will find it, and let us drink and live. We have to fight even half an hour. Not that, I will not be so impolite or so ungrateful, that with whom I have eaten and drank, there is any question, no matter how small, how much more that, being without anger and without anger. And God blessed peace and cursed quarrels, because if a cat harassed, locked up and squeezed turns into a lion, I, who am a man, God knows what I can turn into. All right, replied the forest. God will done and we will thrive. In this, 1,000 kinds of painted little birds began to chirp in the trees. Don Quixote looked at his contender, and found his helmet already on and closed, so that he could not see his face, but he noticed that he was a stocky man, and not very tall in body. Over his weapons he wore a jacket or jacket made of cloth. The spear, which was leaning against a tree, was very large and thick, and made of steel iron, more than a foot long. With this, shortening reasons, they got on horseback. Note, Sir Knight, that the condition of our battle is that the vanquished, as I have said again, must remain at the discretion of the victor. Sancho, who saw his master leave to take up a run, did not want to be left alone with the long-nosed man, fearing that with just one pass with those noses in his quarrel would be over. He said, I beseech your grace, my lord, that before it meets again, help me to climb on that cork oak, from where I will be able to see more to my taste. While Don Quixote waited for Sancho to climb into the cork oak, he took the mirrors from the field as much as he thought necessary, and, believing that Don Quixote would have done the same, without waiting for the sound of a trumpet or any other warning signal, he returned the reins to his horse, but, seeing him engaged in the ascent of Sancho, he stopped the reins and stopped in the middle of the race. Don Quixote, who seemed to him that his enemy was already flying, put his spurs firmly against Rocinante's lopsided flanks, and with this unseen fury he arrived where the one with the mirrors was driving his horse's spurs up to the buttons, without being able to move a single finger from the place where he had sealed his career. In this good season and situation, Don Quixote found his opponent embarrassed by his horse and busy with his lance, which he never, or did not hit, or did not have time to put at the ready. Don Quixote, who did not look at these inconveniences, with a safe hand and without any danger, found the one with the mirrors with such force, that ill of his grade he made him fall to the ground by the haunches of the horse, giving such a fall, that, without moving foot or hand, gave signs that he was dead. Dismounting from Rocinante, he went to the one with the mirrors, and, removing the loops from his helmet to see if he was dead and to give him air if he was alive. He saw, the story goes, the same face, the same figure, the same aspect, the same physiognomy, the same effigy, the same perspective of the bachelor Sanson Carrasco. In all this, the downcast knight gave no sign of being alive, and Sancho said to Don Quixote, I am of the opinion, my lord, that, yes or no, your grace plunges and puts your sword through the mouth of this man, who looks like the bachelor Sanson Carrasco. Perhaps he will kill in it some of his enemies, his enchanters. The squire of the mirrors arrived, now without the noses that had made him so ugly, and in a loud voice he said, Look at what you're doing, Señor Don Quixote, that one at your feet is the bachelor Sanson Carrasco, his friend, and I am his armor-bearer. Holy Mary, and Valm! Isn't this Tomé Cecil, my neighbor, and my compadre? And how if I am? Replied the already noseless squire, Ask and beg your master not to touch, mistreat, injure, or kill the knight of the mirrors. Don Quixote placed the bare point of his sword on his face and said, You are dead, knight, if you do not confess that the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso is superior in beauty to your Quixote de Vandalia, and in addition to this, you must promise, if you remain alive from this conflict and fall, to go to the city of Toboso and present yourself in his presence on my behalf, so that he may do with you what he wishes most. I confess, said the fallen knight, that Mrs. Dulcinea del Toboso's unstitched and dirty shoe is worth more than Quixote's poorly combed, though clean, beard, and I promise to go and return from her presence to yours, and to give you all and particular account of what you ask of me. Let me get up, I beg you, if the blow of my fall allows it, I am so battered. But also the apprehension that in Sancho he had done what the master of him said, that the enchanters had changed the figure of the knight of the mirrors into that of the bachelor Carrasco. Finally, they stayed with this deception, master and boy, and the one with the mirrors and his squire, pouting and scoundrels, separated from Don Quixote and Sancho. Don Quixote and Sancho returned to continue on their way to Zaragoza. Chapter 15. Where it is told and gives news of who was the knight of the mirrors and his squire. Don Quixote was extremely happy, proud, and vainglorious at having achieved victory over such a brave knight as he imagined the one of the mirrors to be. The story goes, then, that when the bachelor Sanson Carrasco advised Don Quixote to resume his lazy chivalry, it was because he had first entered into an argument with the priest and the barber about what means could be taken to reduce Don Quixote to that he was in his house quiet and calm, without being disturbed by his badly sought adventures, whose advice came, by common vote of all and particular opinion of Carrasco, that they let Don Quixote go, since arresting him seemed impossible, and that Samson go out on the road like a knight-errant, and engage him in battle, since he would not fail on what, and defeat him, considering it an easy thing, and that it be a pact and agreement that the vanquished remain at the mercy of the victor. Don Quixote being thus defeated, the knight bachelor had to order him to return to his town and house, and not leave it for 2 years, or until he ordered something else, which it was clear that Don Quixote, defeated, would undoubtedly comply. For not contravening and failing the laws of chivalry, and it could be that in the time of his seclusion he would forget his vanities, or give his madness a place to seek some convenient remedy. Tomé Cecil said to the bachelor, "By the way, Mr. Sanson Carrasco, we've got what we deserve. It's easy to think about and undertake a business, but most of the time you get out of it with difficulty." Crazy Don Quixote, we sane, he goes away healthy and laughing, your grace remains crushed and sad. Let us know, then, now, which one is the craziest, the one who is so because he can't help it, or the one who is so because of his will. The difference between those two crazy people is that the one who is crazy by force will always be crazy, and the one who is crazy by degree will stop being crazy whenever he wants. That satisfies you, answered Samson, because to think that I have to go back to mine, until I have beaten Don Quixote to a pulp, is to think of what is excused, and it will not be the desire to collect his judgment that leads me now to look for him, but the desire for revenge, that the great pain of my ribs does not allow me to make more pious speeches. Chapter 16. Of what happened to Don Quixote with the discreet knight of La Mancha. With the joy, contentment, and pride that has been said, Don Quixote followed his journey, imagining for his past victory to be the bravest knight-errant that the world had at that time. In these reasons they were when they were caught up by a man who was behind them on the same road on a very beautiful dappled mare. "Señor Gallant, if your worship takes the path that we do and it doesn't matter if you hurry, it would be good for us to go together. This figure that your worship has seen in me, being so new and so different from those commonly used, I would not be surprised if it had amazed you, but your worship will cease to be so when I tell you, as I say, that I am one of those knights that people say who go on their adventures. I left my country, pawned my hacienda, left my gift, and gave myself into the arms of fortune, who would take me where she was most served. I wanted to resurrect the already dead cavalry errant. 30,000 volumes of my history have been printed, to enclose everything in a few words, or in a single one, I say that I am Don Quixote de la Mancha. You were right, Sir Knight. How and is it possible that there are knights errant in the world today, and that there are printed histories of true chivalry? Is there anyone who doubts that such stories are not false? I doubt it, responded Don Quixote, and keep this here, that if our journey lasts, I hope to God to make your worship understand that you have done wrong in going with the stream of those who are certain that they are not true. I, Mr. Knight of the sad figure, am a native hidalgo of a place where we will go to eat today, if God be served. I am more than moderately rich and my name is Don Diego de Miranda. I spend my life with my wife, and with my children, and with my friends. My exercises are hunting and fishing. I, Señor Don Quixote, replied the hidalgo, have a son who, if he did not have him, would perhaps judge me happier than I am, and not because he is bad, but because he is not as good as I would like. He will be 18 years old, all 6 he has been in Salamanca, learning the Latin and Greek languages, and, when I wanted him to go on to study other sciences, I found him so absorbed in that of poetry, if it can be called a science, that it is not possible to make him face that of the laws, which I would like him to study, nor of the queen of all theology. I would like it to be the crown of his lineage, since we live in a century where our kings highly reward virtuous and good letters, because letters without virtue are pearls in the dunghill. The children, sir, are pieces of the entrails of their parents, and thus, they have to love each other, whether they are good or bad, as the souls that give us life love each other. It is up to the parents to lead them from a young age through the steps of virtue, good breeding, and good and Christian customs, so that when they grow up they will be the staff of their parents' old age and the glory of their posterity, and in forcing them to study this or that science I do not consider it correct. Although persuading them will not be harmful. I would be of opinion that they let him follow that science to which they see him most inclined, and, although that of poetry is less useful than delightful, it is not one of those that tend to dishonor those who possess it. Poetry, Sir Hidalgo, in my opinion, is like a tender and young maiden, and in all extremes beautiful, whom they take care to enrich, polish and adorn many other maidens, which are all the other sciences, and she it must serve as all, and all must be authorized with it, but this such a maiden does not want to be groped, or brought through the streets, or published by the corners of the squares or by the corners of the palaces. She is made of an alchemy of such virtue that whoever knows how to treat her will turn her into pure gold of inestimable price. He has to keep her, whoever has her, at bay from her, not letting her run in clumsy satires or heartless sonnets. She is not to be saleable in any way, except in heroic poems, in pitiful tragedies, or in gay and contrived comedies. It must not be treated by rogues, nor by the ignorant vulgar, incapable of knowing or estimating the treasures that are locked up in it. And so, the one who, with the requirements that I have said, treats and has poetry, will be famous and esteemed by her name in all the political nations of the world. I also say that the natural poet who helps himself with art will be much better and will outperform the poet who wants to be one only for knowing art. The reason is because art does not outdo nature, but refines it, so, mixing nature and art with nature, they will produce a most perfect poet. Let it be, then, the conclusion of my talk, gentleman Hidalgo, that your mercy let his son walk where his star calls him. You quarrel with your son if he makes satires that damage the honors of others, and punish him, and break them, but if he makes sermons in the manner of Horace, where he reprimands vices in general, as he did so elegantly, praise him, because it is lawful to poet to write against envy, and to say in his verses ill of the envious, and thus of the other vices, as long as he does not indicate any person. If the poet is chaste in his customs, he will also be chaste in his verses. His pen is the language of the soul. The man in the green coat was amazed at Don Quixote's reasoning, and so much so that he gradually lost the opinion he had of him, of being a fool. When, raising his head, Don Quixote saw that along the road along which they were going, a cart full of royal flags was coming, and, believing that it must be some new adventure, he loudly called Sancho to come and give him the helmet. Chapter 17. From where the last point and extreme where the unprecedented spirit of Don Quixote arrived and could arrive was declared, with the happily finished adventure of the lions. The story goes that when Don Quixote called out to Sancho to bring him his helmet, he was buying some curds that the shepherds were selling him, and, harassed by his master's great haste, he did not know what to do with them, or what to bring them in, and, not to lose them, since he had already paid for them, he agreed to throw them into his master's ambush, and with this good message he returned to see what he wanted, who, on arriving, said to him, "Give me, friend, that helmet, that I know little about adventures, or what I discover there is one that will need me, and needs me, to take up my weapons." The one with the green coat discovered that a car was coming towards them, with 2 or 3 small flags, which made him understand that such a car must have brought his majesty's currency, and so he told Don Quixote, but he didn't give her credit. And, turning to Sancho, he asked for the helmet, which, as he had no place to take out the curds, was forced to give it to him as it was. With all haste he stuck it on his head, and, as the curds were squeezed and squeezed, she began to run the serum all over Don Quixote's face and beard. "For the life of my lady Dulcinea del Toboso, those are curds that you have put here for me, traitor, scoundrel and ill-regarded squire. If they're cottage cheese, give them to me, your grace, and I'll eat them. But let the devil eat them, he must have been the one who put them there. I too must have enchanters who persecute me as if you were a member of your mercy, and they will have put that filth there to stir their patience to anger and make me grind my ribs, as usual." "Anything can be," said Don Quixote. And the hidalgo looked at everything, and he admired everything. At this point the cart with the flags arrived, in which no other people came than the driver on mules and a man sitting in the front. "Where are you going, brothers? What car is this, what do you have in it and what are these flags?" "The car is mine, what goes in it are 2 brave caged lions, which the general of Oran sends to court, presented to his majesty. The flags belong to the king our lord, as a sign that here is his thing. They are female and male, the male goes in this first cage, and the female in the one behind, and now they are hungry because they haven't eaten today, and so, your worship goes astray, for it is necessary to arrive quickly where we feed them." "Little lions to me? To me little lions, and at such hours? Well, by God, what do those gentlemen who send them here have to see if I am a man who is scared of lions? Get down, good man, and, since you are the lion, open those cages and throw those beasts out for me." "Ta, ta," said the hidalgo to himself at this time, "he has given a sign of who our good gentleman is. The curds, without a doubt, have softened his helmets and matured his brains." And, approaching Don Quixote, who was hurrying the lion driver to open the cages, he said to him, "Sir Knight, knights errant must undertake adventures that promise hope of coming out of them well, and not those that take it all away. Because the bravery that enters the jurisdiction of recklessness has more of madness than strength. Go away, your grace, gentlemen, to understand with your meek pellet and your daring ferret, and let each one do his job. I vote for such, Don Miscreant, that if you don't open the cages soon, that with this spear I will sow you with the cart." The Leonero said in a loud voice, "As many of you here are witnesses to me how against my will and forced I open the cages and release the lions, and that I protest to this gentleman that all the evil and damage that these beasts do run and go on their own, plus my wages and rights. Your Mercedes, gentlemen, collect before I open, I'm sure they won't hurt me." "Look, sir," said Sancho, "there's no charm here or anything worth it, that I have seen through the gates and cracks of the cage a true lion's claw." Sancho wept over the death of his master, who doubtless believed that time that he was arriving in the claws of lions. In the space that the lion driver took to open the first cage, Don Quixote was considering whether it would be better to fight the battle before on foot than on horseback, and, finally, he decided to do it on foot, fearing that Rocinante would be frightened by the sight of the lions. Seeing the lioness already put Don Quixote in position, he opened wide the first cage, where the lion was. Only Don Quixote looked at him attentively, wanting him to jump out of the car and come with him to the hands, between which he intended to tear him to pieces. But the generous lion, after having looked from one side to the other, as has been said, turned his back and showed his rear parts to Don Quixote, and with great phlegm and calm he threw himself back into the cage. Seeing what Don Quixote did, he ordered the lion man to beat him up and irritate him to throw him out. "I won't do that," replied the leonero, "because if I instigate him, the first person he will tear to pieces will be myself. Your Grace, Sir Knight, be content with what has been done, which is all that can be said in terms of courage, and do not want to tempt second fortune. The greatness of your Grace's heart is already well declared. No brave fighter, as far as I can tell, is obliged to do more than challenge his enemy and wait for him on campaign, and if the opponent does not come, the infamy remains with him, and the waiting party wins the crown of victory." "That's true," replied Don Quixote. "Close the door, friend, and testify to me, in the best way you can, what you have seen me do here." The leonero did so, and Don Quixote, placing the cloth with which he had wiped the rain from the curds on his face at the point of his lance, began to call out to those who did not stop fleeing or turning their heads at every step. "Go back, brother, harness your mules and continue your journey, and you, Sancho, give him 2 gold shields, for him and for the leonero, as a reward for what they have stopped for me. What do you think of this, Sancho? Are there charms that count against true bravery?" The chariot continued on its way, and Don Quixote, Sancho, and the man in the green coat continued theirs. "Who doubts, Señor Don Diego de Miranda, that your worship does not consider me to be a crazy man? And it would not be much if it were so, because my works cannot bear witness to anything else. Well, with all this, I want your Grace to notice that I am not as crazy or as diminished as I must have seemed to you. But the knight-errant seeks the corners of the world, he enters the most intricate labyrinths, he undertakes the impossible at every step. And so, the attacking of the lions that I now attack directly touched me, since I knew to be exorbitant recklessness, because I know well what courage is, that it is a virtue that is placed between 2 vicious extremes, such as cowardice and recklessness, but less badly it will be that the one who is brave touches and goes up to the point of reckless, that not that he goes down and touches in the point of cowardice, that just as it is easier for the prodigal to become liberal than for the miser, so it is easier for the reckless to become truly brave than for the coward to rise to true courage. I say, Señor Don Quixote, that everything your Grace has said and done is levelled with the faithful of the same reason, and that I understand that if the ordinances and laws of knight-errantry were lost, they would be found in the chest of your Grace, as in its own deposit and file. And let's hurry up, it's getting late, and let's get to my village and home." And, biting more than before, it would be around 2 in the afternoon when they reached the village and Don Diego's house. Chapter 18. Of what happened to Don Quixote in the castle or house of the Knight of the Green Coat, with other extravagant things. Don Quixote found it to be the house of Don Diego de Miranda. The student poet, Don Diego's son, who had come out to receive him with his mother, heard him say this. They entered Don Quixote in a room. "Señor Don Diego de Miranda, your Grace's father, has informed me of the rare ability and subtle ingenuity that your Grace has, and, above all, that your Grace is a great poet." "Poet, he may well be," answered Don Lorenzo, "but great, not even by thought. It is true that I am somewhat fond of poetry and reading good poets, but not in such a way that I can be given the name of great that my father says." "That humility doesn't seem bad to me," replied Don Quixote, "because there is no poet who is not arrogant and thinks of himself that he is the greatest poet in the world. It seems to me that your Grace has attended the schools. What sciences has he heard?" "The one with the errant cavalry." "It is a science," replied Don Quixote, "that contains in itself all or most of the sciences in the world, because the one who professes it must be a jurisperto, and know the laws of distributive and commutative justice, in order to give each one what he deserves. What is yours and what suits you, he must be a theologian, in order to know how to account for the Christian law that he professes, clearly and distinctly, wherever he is asked. He has to be a doctor and mainly an herbalist, to know in the middle of the depopulated and deserts the herbs that have the virtue of healing wounds. He has to be an astrologer, to know by the stars how many hours are spent at night, and in what part and what climate of the world is it in. He must know mathematics, because at every step he will be offered to need them, and, leaving aside that he must be adorned with all the theological and cardinal virtues, descending to other trifles, he must know how to shoe a horse and dress the saddle and bridle, and, returning to above, he is to keep the faith to God and his lady. He must be chaste in thoughts, honest in words, liberal in deeds, brave in deeds, long-suffering in work, charitable to the needy, and, finally, upholder of the truth, even if it cost him His life to defend it? They went to eat. Gloss. In the end, as everything happens, the good that Fortuna gave me passed away, not a short time, and she never returned it to me, neither abundantly, nor by fee. Don Quixote spent 4 days in Don Quixote's house, at the end of which he asked permission to leave. And they told him to take from his house and from his property whatever came to him. I am content only to warn your worship that, being a poet, you can be famous if you are guided more by the opinion of others than by your own, because there is no father or mother to whom their children seem ugly, and in those who are of the understanding runs more this deception. The offers and restraints were reiterated, and, with the good permission of the lady of the castle, Don Quixote and Sancho, on top of Rocinante and the Dapple, parted. Chapter 19. Where the adventure of the shepherd in love is told, with other really funny events. Don Quixote had gone a short distance from Don Diego's place when he met 2 as clerics or as students and 2 farmers riding 4 donkey beasts as knights. If your grace, Sir Knight, does not take a certain path, as those who seek adventure do not usually take, your grace will come with us, you will see one of the best and richest weddings that will have been celebrated in Mexico to this day. The stain. Who par excellence is called Quiteria the Beautiful, and the bridegroom is called Camacho the Rich. Some curious people who remember the lineages of the whole world want to say that the one from the beautiful Quiteria is superior to that of Camacho. To get rid of being suspicious and full of suspicion, he ordered her daughter to marry the rich Camacho, not seeming to him to marry her to Basilio. For that grace alone, Don Quixote said at this moment, that young man deserved not only to marry the beautiful Quiteria. My wife with that. Sancho Panza said, what I would like is for that good Basilio, who I am already becoming fond of, to marry that lady Quiteria. May there be a good century and good soil, those who hinder those who love each other from marrying. If all those who love each other were to marry, said Don Quixote, the choice and jurisdiction of parents would be taken away from marrying their children to whom and when they should, and if it were left to the will of the daughters to choose the husbands, such would be the choice of her father's servant. I have nothing more to say about everything except that from the point that Basilio knew that the beautiful Quiteria was marrying the rich Camacho, they have never seen him laugh or speak with concerted reason. Give me that Quiteria loves Basilio with a good heart and good will, and I will give him a sack of good fortune, that love, according to what I have heard, looks with whims that make copper look like gold, wealth to poverty, and pearls to laganas. Look, bachelor, answered the lawyer, you have the most mistaken opinion in the world about the skill of the sword, considering it vain. For me, it's not an opinion, but an established truth, replied Corchuelo. And if you want me to show you with experience, swords you bring, comfort there, I have pulses and strength. Now we'll see, replied Corchuelo. And, dismounting with great alacrity from his donkey, he furiously yanked on one of the swords that the licentiate carried in his. It doesn't have to be like that, Don Quixote said at this moment, for I want to be the master of this fencing, and the judge of this often unanswered question. And, dismounting from Rocinante and taking hold of his lance, he stood in the middle of the road, at the same time that the lawyer, with a gentle grace of body and rhythm of feet, went against Corchuelo. Finally, the lawyer counted all the buttons on a half-cassock that he was wearing, making strips of the skirts, like octopus tails, he knocked down his hat twice, and tired him so that in spite, anger, and rage he seized the sword by the hilt, and flung it through the air nearly 3/4 of a league, which testimony serves and has served so that it is known and seen with all truth how force is defeated by art. And, getting up, he embraced the lawyer, and more friends remained than before, and not wanting to wait for the clerk, who had gone for the sword, because it seemed to him that it would take a long time, and so, they decided to continue, arriving early at the village of Quiteria, where they were all from. He was dusk. They also heard confused and soft sounds of different instruments and dances that had to be done in that place dedicated to solemnize the wedding of the rich Camacho and the funeral of Basilio. Don Quixote did not want to enter the place, but he excused himself, it is the custom of knights-errant to sleep in the fields and forests rather than in the towns. Chapter XX. Where the weddings of Camacho the rich are told, with the event of Basilio the poor. Don Quixote, shaking off the sluggishness of his limbs, stood up and called his squire Sancho. Honestly, sir, I am of the opinion that the poor man should be satisfied with what he finds, and not ask for catufas in the Gulf. I will bet an arm that Camacho can wrap Basilio in reals, and if this is so, as it should be, Quiteria would have been a fool to throw away the finery and jewels that he must have given her. A good building can be built on a good foundation, and the best foundation and ditch in the world is money. Finally, the wedding apparatus was crude, but so abundant that it could support an army. Long live Camacho and Quiteria, he is as rich as she is beautiful, and she is the most beautiful in the world. It seems that they have not seen my Dulcinea del Toboso, that if they had seen her, they would go hand in hand in praising her Quiteria. After this came another dance of artifice and what they call spoken. It was made up of 8 nymphs, divided into 2 rows, the god Cupid was the guide of one row, and Interest was the other, the former, adorned with wings, a bow, a quiver, and arrows, this one, dressed in rich and diverse colors of gold and silk. The nymphs who followed Love carried on their backs, in white parchment and large letters, their names written. Poetry was the title of the first, that of the second Discretion, that of the third Good Lineage, that of the fourth Bravery. In the same way those that followed Interest were indicated. The title of the first said Liberality, Gift that of the second, Treasure that of the third and fourth Peaceful Possession. Ahead of all came a wooden castle, which was being shot by 4 savages, all dressed in ivy and hemp dyed green. On the border of the castle and in all 4 parts of his paintings was written, Castle of Good Modesty. 4 skillful drummers and flute players played the sun for them. The Cupid dance began, and, having made 2 changes, he raised his eyes and shot his bow at a maiden who was standing between the battlements of the castle, to whom this fate said, I am the mighty god in the air and on the moon, land and in the wide flooding sea, and as soon as the abyss encloses in its frightful baratro. I never knew what fear is, I can do everything I want, even if I want the impossible, and in everything that is possible I command, I take, I put, and I see. He finished the couplet, shot an arrow over the top of the castle and retired to his post. He then left the Interest, and made 2 other moves. The tamburinos fell silent, and he said, I am the one who can do more than love, and it is love who guides me. I am of the lineage better than heaven on earth breed, better known and older. I am the Interest, in whom few usually act well, and acting without me is a great miracle, and as I am, I consecrate myself to you, forever and ever, Amen. Interest withdrew, and Poetry went forward, which, after having made her changes like the others, with her eyes fixed on the maid of the castle, said, in sweetest concepts, the sweetest poetry, lofty, serious and discreet, lady, the soul sends you wrapped among 1,000 sonnets. If perhaps my argument does not bother you, your fortune, of many others envied, will be raised by me on the fence of the moon. Poetry was diverted, and Liberality came out of Interest, and, after making his changes, he said, they call liberality when the extreme flees from prodigality, and on the contrary, it argues lukewarm and weak will. But I, to magnify you, from today more, prodigal I have to be, that, although it is vice, it is honest vice and of chest in love, that in giving is seen. And then they all mingled, making and breaking bonds with graceful grace and ease, and when Love passed in front of the castle, he shot over his arrows, but Interest broke golden piggy banks in him. Finally, the Interest took out a bag, which seemed to be full of money, and, throwing it into the castle, with the blow the boards dislodged and fell, leaving the maiden uncovered and without any defense. Interest came with figures of her worth, and, throwing a great gold chain around her neck, they showed her seized, yielded, and captivated, which, seen by Love and her supporters, made a gesture to take it away from her. The savages put them in peace, who with great haste reassembled and fit together the boards of the castle, and the maiden shut herself up in it as once again, and with this the dance ended, to the great joy of those who watched her. Don Quixote asked one of the nymphs who had composed and ordered it. She replied that a beneficiary of that town. I'll bet, said Don Quixote, that he must be more of a friend of Camacho than of Basilio, that bachelor or beneficiary, and that he must be more satirical than Eve. To the beard of Basilio's skills. You are worth as much as you have, and you have as much as you are worth. There are only 2 families in the world, an ass covered with gold seems better than a saddled horse. You don't even need them, said Don Quixote, but I do not quite understand or reach how, since the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, you, who fear a lizard more than him, know so much. Your Grace, sir, judge his chivalry, replied Sancho, and don't get involved in judging the fears or bravery of others, for I am as gentle and fearful of God as every neighbor's son. Chapter XXI. Where Camacho's weddings continue, with other pleasant events. Loud voices and great noise were heard, and the Mares gave them and caused him, who with a long run and shouts went to receive the bride and groom. The beautiful Quiteria was somewhat discolored, and it must have been the bad night that brides always spent getting ready for their wedding day to come. They were approaching a theater that was on one side of the meadow, and, just as they reached the stall, they heard loud voices behind them, and one that said, "Wait a little, you people as inconsiderate as they are hasty." Coming closer, he was known to all by the dashing Basilio. He finally arrived, tired and out of breath. "You know well, unknown Quiteria, that according to the holy law that we profess, that as long as I live, you cannot take a husband, but you, throwing on your back all the obligations that you owe to my goodwill, want to make someone else lord of what is mine, whose riches serve you not only for good fortune, but also for very good fortune. Long live the rich Camacho with the ungrateful Quiteria, long and happy centuries, and die poor Basilio, whose poverty cut off his wings of happiness and put him in the grave." And, saying this, he took hold of the cane that he had stuck in the ground, and, keeping half of it on the ground, he showed that it served as a sheath for a medium rapier that was hidden in it, and, putting what could be called a hilt on the ground, with slight nonchalance and determined purpose, he threw himself on him, and at one point showed the bloody point behind his back, with half of the steel blade, leaving the sad man bathed in his blood, and stretched out on the ground, pierced with their own weapons. Don Quixote went to favor him and took him in his arms, and found that he had not yet expired. They wanted to remove the rapier, but the priest, who was present, was of the opinion that they should not be removed before confessing to him, because the removal and the expiring would be all at once. If you wanted, cruel Quiteria, to give me the hand of a wife in this last and forced moment, I would still think that my temerity would have an excuse, because in it I achieved the good of being yours. The priest, hearing which, told him to pay attention to the health of the soul before the tastes of the body, and to sincerely ask God for forgiveness of his sins and of his desperate determination. To which Basilio replied that in no way would he confess if Quiteria did not first give him her hand as his wife, that contentment would marinate her will and give her encouragement to confess. When Don Quixote heard the wounded man's request, he said in a loud voice that Basilio was asking for something very just and reasonable, and also very reasonable, and that Mr. Camacho would be as honored to receive Mrs. Quiteria, widow of the valiant Basilio, as if received her from her father's side. The voices of Basilio's friends were so many, asking him to consent to Quiteria giving him the hand of his wife, so that his soul would not be lost, departing desperately from this life, that they moved him, and even forced him, to say that if Quiteria wanted to give it to him, that he was content, since everything was delaying for a moment the fulfillment of his desires. Then the beautiful Quiteria, without answering a word, disturbed, apparently sad and sorrowful, came to where Basilio was, her eyes turned back, her breath short and hurried, murmuring the name of Quiteria between her teeth, showing signs of dying as a Gentile, and not as a Christian. Finally, Quiteria arrived, and she, on her knees, asked for his hand by signs, and not by words. Basilio widened his eyes, and, looking at her attentively, said, "O Quiteria, you have come to be pious in time when your pity will serve as a knife that ends up taking my life, because I no longer have the strength to carry the sword. You give me glory in choosing me for yours, nor to suspend the pain that so quickly covers my eyes with the frightening shadow of death. What I beg of you is, O my fatal star, that the hand that you ask me and want to give me is not for compliance, nor to deceive me again, but that you confess and say that, without forcing your will, you give it to me. And you give her to me as your lawful husband." He told her, no force was enough to bend my will, and so, with the freest hand I have, I give you the hand of lawful wife, and I receive yours, if you give it to me of your free will. "Yes, I do," replied Basilio, not disturbed or confused, but with the clear understanding that heaven wanted to give me, and so, I give myself and I give myself for your husband. "And I for your wife," answered Quiteria, "now live long years, now take you from my arms to the grave." Being, then, Basilio and Quiteria holding hands, the priest, tender and tearful, blessed them and asked heaven to give good rest to the soul of the newly betrothed, which, just as he received the blessing, quickly rose to his feet, and with unseen ease took out the rapier, to which his body served as a sheath. The priest, heedless and astonished, went with both hands to feel the wound, and found that the blade had passed, not through Basilio's flesh and ribs, but through a hollow iron cannon that, full of blood, in that place well accommodated had. Finally, the priest and Camacho, along with all those around them, thought they were mocked and mocked. The wife showed no signs of regretting the mockery, before, hearing that this marriage, because it was deceitful, would not be valid, she said that she confirmed it again, from which they all inferred that the case had been drawn up with the consent and wisdom of the two, from which Camacho and his supporters remained so confused that they sent their revenge to their hands, and, unsheathing many swords, they attacked Basilio, in whose favor in an instant nearly as many were unsheathed. And Don Quixote taking the lead on horseback, with his lance on his arm and well covered with his shield, made room for everyone. Don Quixote, in loud voices, said, "Take it, gentlemen, take it, it's no reason to take revenge for the wrongs that love does us, and note that love and war are the same thing, and just as in war it is lawful and customary to use tricks and stratagems to defeat the enemy, so in love disputes and competitions, lies and tangles are considered good. They are done to achieve the desired end, as long as they are not detrimental and dishonorable to the loved one." Quiteria belonged to Basilio, and Basilio to Quiteria, by the just and favorable disposition of heaven. Camacho is rich, and he will be able to buy his taste when, where, and how he wants. Basilio no longer has the sheep, and no one, no matter how powerful, will take it from him, that the two that God joins, man will not be able to separate, and whoever attempts it must first pass through the tip of the spear. And, in this, he wielded it so strong and so deftly that it frightened everyone who did not know him, and Quiteria's disdain was so intensely fixed in Camacho's imagination that it was erased from his memory in an instant. And so, the persuasions of the priest, who was a prudent and well-intentioned man, took place with him, with which Camacho and those of his partiality remained peaceful and calm, as a sign of which they returned the swords to their places, blaming Quitería's facility more than Basilio's industry. Camacho made a speech that if Quitería loved Basilio well as a maiden, she would also love him married, and that she should give thanks to heaven, more for having taken her from her than for having given her to her. Consoled, then, and peaceful, Camacho and his retinue, all of Basilio's men calmed down, and the rich Camacho, to show that he did not feel the mockery, nor did he esteem her at all, wanted the parties to go ahead as if they really will marry, but neither Basilio nor his wife nor his henchmen wanted to attend them, and so they went to the village of Basilio. They took Don Quixote with them, esteeming him a man of courage and hair on his chest. Only Sancho's soul darkened as he was unable to wait for Camacho's splendid dinner and parties, which lasted until nightfall. Chapter XXII, where he realizes the great adventure of the cave of Montesinos, which is in the heart of La Mancha, which the brave Don Quixote of La Mancha gave a happy summit. Great were and many were the gifts that the bride and groom made to Don Quixote, obliged by the samples that he had given defending his cause. The good Sancho rejoiced for 3 days at the expense of the bride and groom, of whom it was learned that it was not an act communicated with the beautiful Quitería to vainly injure herself, but Basilio's industry, expecting from her the same event that had been seen. Those who set their sights on virtuous ends cannot and should not be called deceptions, said Don Quixote. The honest poor man, if the poor man can be honest, has a guarantee in having a beautiful woman, who, when they take her away, take away her honor and kill her. The beautiful and honest woman, whose husband is poor, deserves to be crowned with laurels and palms of victory and triumph. Her beauty, by itself, attracts the wills of those who look at her and know her, and as her happy decoy the royal eagles and the haughty birds swoop down on her, but if necessity and narrowness are added to such beauty, crows, kites and other birds of prey also attack it, and the one that is so many firm encounters well deserves to be called her husband's crown. Give advice to whoever asked me about how to look for the woman he wanted to marry. First of all, I would advise her to look more to fame than to wealth, because a good woman does not achieve good fame just by being good, but by appearing to be, that much more harm to the honors of women are public carelessness and liberties than secret wickedness. If you bring a good woman to your house, it would be an easy thing to keep her, and even improve her, in that goodness of hers, but if you bring her bad, it will be her job to fix it. It is not very feasible to go from one extreme to another. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I consider it difficult. Finally, 3 days they were with the bride and groom, where they were presented and served as the bodies of a king. Commending themselves to God and saying goodbye to everyone, they set off, taking the course of the famous cave of Montesinos. The cousin told Don Quixote that from there to the cave of Montesinos there was no more than 2 leagues, and that if he had determined to enter it, it was necessary to provide himself with ropes, to tie himself and lower himself in its depths. Don Quixote said that even if he reached the abyss, he had to see where he stopped, and so, they bought almost 100 fathoms of rope, and another day, at 2 in the afternoon, they arrived at the cave. Tie up and shut up, responded Don Quixote, such an undertaking as this, Sancho my friend, was reserved for me. And, saying this, he approached the chasm. He saw that it would not be possible to lower himself, nor make room for the entrance, if it was not by force of arms, or by knives, and so, putting his hand to his sword, he began to cut down and cut from those weeds that were at the mouth of the cave. Don Quixote went shouting for them to give him rope and more rope, and they gave it to him little by little. And when the voices, which were channeled through the cave, ceased to be heard, they already had the 100 fathoms of rope down, and they thought they were going to climb Don Quixote again, since they could not give him more rope. With all that, they stopped for about half an hour, after which time they picked up the rope again very easily and without any weight, a sign that made them imagine that Don Quixote was staying inside. Finally, at 10 o'clock they distinctly saw Don Quixote. But Don Quixote did not answer a word, and, pulling him out completely, they saw that he had his eyes closed, showing signs of being asleep. But they turned and stirred him so much, they shook and shook him, that after a good space he came to himself. God forgive you, friends, that you have taken from me the most delicious and pleasant life and sight that no human has seen or passed. Indeed, now I have just learned that all the happy ones in this life pass like a shadow and a dream, or wither like the flower of the field. No one gets up, and stay with me, children, all of you attentive.